Well, we get another addition to the Lonely Robot library, and this is the first album to kind of deviate from the whole spaceman outfit, but I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let's just dive into this record. Feelings Are Good by Lonely Robot. So, Lonely Robot is a UK progressive rock band. They're more in the style of like a retro progressive rock, but with a neo flavor into that. It's spearheaded by John Mitchell, and John Mitchell is the lead guitarist for such bands as It Bites and Kinno, Frost, which is probably my favorite, and he's had some work with Arena. Lonely Robot was kind of his first solo project, and the first album from Lonely Robot came out back in 2015, and I had some more than lukewarm feelings for that. I actually quite enjoyed it. My favorite still to this date is still The Big Dream. I still feel like that's his best work to this date. And then Under the Stars came out in last year. And these three albums kind of hold a similar narrative storyline. This is the first one that kind of deviates from that. And it's John Mitchell on the front screen or the front cover of the album. And it's, on the one hand, it does deviate a little bit from the predecessing three albums that we had before, but at the same time, it still has that traditional Lonely Robot feels to it. It still has what we associate with Lonely Robot and John Mitchell overall. And in some respects, this is really good, and it's kind of a pleasant listen because at no point do I ever feel like there's too much or too little, or I'm being surprised too much. Like, it's a very, and I hate to use this as like a diminishing kind of a stance, but it's a very safe album. In that respects, I was a little bit let down because I was hoping that it would deviate a little bit more, especially with the concept of Feelings Are Good. For the most part, it's very mellow. Like that's really, this is probably the mellowest and softest album of the four. And in some respects, I actually kind of like that. Like, I like that there's this very distinct personality on this album that wasn't quite felt within the first three. But those tracks that don't quite follow suit, they stick out quite a bit. And the ones that I'm thinking of are Spiders and Army of One, the second last track. Both of these are very big and punchy and right in your face, and where this would have fit well on any of the past albums, these tracks feel almost out of place on this one. And Spiders, I believe, was the single off of this one. Like, Spiders was the one that kind of was the big advertising track off of this, and it's probably my least favorite track off of it. I don't find that it's all that catchy. I actually find it a little bit on the grating side. Like, I find myself wishing the song would end, just with John's singing styles of spiders, spiders, da da da, and it just doesn't grip me all that well. It doesn't really satisfy my musical taste, especially when we started off the album with Feelings Are Good, the title track. And it's a very clean harmonizing track, and it's got almost this overproduced auto-tuned voice going on, and it provides this kind of like robot thinking about or processing what emotions are and coming to this conclusion that they are good, and here is the evidence for that, and we're coming into the lo-fi, and I think that's a really good segue into the album. And Into the Lo-Fi is a very nice and smooth track, and this was kind of what I was expecting for the album overall. It's very clean. It's probably what I would have led with this album. But then when we come into Spiders, it's more of a grind. It's more of a quick transition from this really smooth, Into the Lo-Fi is a very adequate name for that, but it just doesn't blend all that well, because like the next 4 or 5 tracks, right from Crystalline, Life is a Sine Wave, Armor of My Heart, Suburbia, The Silent Life, and Keeping People as Pets, all these tracks feel very unified and very singular. They're all more mellow, they're more on the quiet side, they're much more impressionistic, but I like how each of these tracks do hold something very personal, and they are talking more about emotions. Suburbia is probably my favorite track off of this album. It feels much more like a Frost track. We have this really great clean synthesizer leading the track in. It's very quick, it's very punchy, it's never like bombastic or completely in your face, but it is very clear. And I like how that root continues on when the song begins to blossom and begins to fill out. We have a lot more of those singing styles that John is known for, paired off very well with all the guitar styles on that. And that bleeds itself into The Silent Life, which is probably my second favorite track. So these two tracks feel very unified. They feel very similar and complement one another very well. Where Suburbia was much more of a little bit more of this heavy hitting aspect, like it feels much more like a unified, quicker piece. The Silent Life is much more humbled, a lot more quiet. Like we still have the keyboards leading us through the track, but they're softer. They're not quite as hard hitting. It feels much more like a cloud or wisps of cotton, and that essence, that feeling continues throughout the track. And then when we finally come to people keeping people as pets, it's getting back to more of this rocker aspect. It's getting a little bit more punchy. And I actually like the beginning. It feels much more robotic in approach. It's a little bit more techno. I love the soundscapes that we have. Again, it's the keyboards leading us through, but it's got more of a dancey beat. It's picking us up after this kind of longer stretch of these mellower pieces. And Keeping People as Pets has a really great rhythm style on it. It's got such a great groove that I hadn't heard from the rest of the album up to that point, but I like that it's distinguished enough to be a really nice pickup and a really kind of nice endpoint to all these somber and slower tracks. Unfortunately, once we get to Army of One, that kind of comes to a screeching halt because it does continue that momentum that we had for Keeping People as Pets as being a harder hitting track, as a more oomph track, but I just feel like Army of One, especially when they keep saying, let's start a war, it's too much. I feel it's just a little too in your face. It's a little too on the nose. There's no subtlety that we had from the past couple of tracks. It's very like right there in your face. And when we come to the final track of Grief is the Price of Love, it's a little bit melodramatic. It's a little bit too easy, I feel, but it's still a really nice closing piece, and it does wrap the album overall off very nicely as a great punctuation mark. It's a really nice closing piece. So even though this album is just under an hour long, I never really felt the runtime. I never felt the length of it. I felt like it was still a very well packaged piece, because I know a lot of albums this year have been on the longer side, and that's one of my biggest critique, but even though this one is on the longer side, at no point do I really feel that it's too long. I feel like it is the exact length that it needs to be in order to tell the story that it's setting out to tell. But it did leave me wanting more in not necessarily the best way. I feel like even though this might be a little bit better than their past album of Under Stars, I don't feel like it's up to the same level as the first one of Please Come Home and The Big Dream, the second album. So it's kind of like right in that middle style. So this is one that I would probably stream. It's one that I would still check out, especially if you're into this retro neo-prog, which is kind of an oxymoron. But it's one that I still enjoyed, but it's probably one that I won't come back to. Definitely not like The Big Dream. But yeah, it's still one that I would check out. So there you go. That's Feelings Are Good from The Lonely Robot. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know of your own comments by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.